All right, welcome back, everybody. This is Coach Reese with Coach Loretta and special guest Coach Katie O'Connor. She has been on the podcast before, so if you guys are fans of ours, you've probably heard her voice. But if not, go back in the archives and check out the other podcast that we had with her about Bigfoot 200. So that'll be fun. Today we have a topic that everybody's going to have to deal with at some point, and that is what the heck goes on in your head during an ultra marathon? What are these mental skills that we need as ultra runners to get us down the trail and to get us finishing with good spirits? But first, Coach Loretta, how are you doing? What's new?
I'm doing great. Recovering really well from the Raven 24 hour and getting back into a new training cycle and feeling really good. So I'm excited to see where it goes from here.
Good. And you, Coach Katie?
I'm good. I mean, our weather's kind of crazy, but I'll take the sunshine and I'll take the 60-degree days when we get them in February, So, yeah, can't complain.
Oh my gosh, that's right. We dealt with some tornadoes that actually hit like 2 miles south of us. So we're in Barrington, and South
Miles.
Barrington actually got hit. So we have neighbors who have videos of like their entire swing sets like completely demolished with like one pile of lumber over here, and then like the slide itself on the other side of the yard with
Crazy.
trees down and roofs blown off. Like it's nuts. It's probably the craziest weather system I've ever been in. But we got clear skies and nice weather coming towards us for this weekend. So we're actually Deanna and I are going to be getting out to the Potawatomi course to go run
Oh,
that
cool.
this weekend.
Nice.
Nice.
So side note, we had a coaches meeting on Tuesday night, and this is all going on in Reese's background while he so dutifully does the entire coaches meeting. I mean, like if it were me, I would have been cowering somewhere, but not him. And he's like goes through it, just tells you his mental strength to stay focused on it, going through it. And then we get to the end and he's like, I think a tornado touched down like the next city next to me. So
I
all that
don't.
time it was right next to you, and you were just dedicated to the sport.
It's probably my biggest strength and biggest weakness is the ability to just put the blinders on and forget about everything except for what's in front of me. Deanna would probably say that it's my biggest weakness sometimes because I'll just get so tunnel visioned on one thing. But I don't know. I say it's a strength in circumstances like that. But
You didn't
yeah,
waver. I would never have known.
it was great listening to Dr. Liesel's explanation on different analyses that she does with all of our new coaching clients. So for anybody that's new to like the coaching, like our coaching program is we're creating this ecosystem where athletes sign on with us. They get a PT consultation. They get a direction as far as like where to go for their strength training when they first sign on. So that way we can do some prehab, do some rehab, work with an athlete's imbalances. So that way, like as we pile the training on, it doesn't like tear us down. So that's kind of what our coaching meeting was about. So just a good example of how we're all think tanking and sharing with each other like our own expertises.
And the
Which
sirens
is,
and the rain was so loud he could barely hear, but he just persevered.
yeah, thanks. So, Coach Katie, I guess tell me why, as ultra runners, we can't just think about ourselves as legs with lungs, and why we have to train our brains just as much as we have to train our bodies. What's the importance of brain training in ultra running?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The saying is right that ultra running is 90% mental, 10% legs. Or what do they say? 90% mental, like 100% mental, something, like, right? That it's mostly mental, long story short. And I think, yeah, there's a point where I think no matter what distance you're running, if it's a new distance for you or if it's something, at some point, once we get longer and longer, your between your ears starts chattering, right? And I think that's even just in our day-to-day lives, right? Like those little, it's like I kind of say like the two shoulders are talking, right? You've got like the positive side of you that's like, you can do this, like you're going to crush this interview, or, you're going to crush this workout. The other side's like, you didn't sleep good, I don't know how you're going to do in that interview, or, your leg's still awfully tired. How are you going to perform in that tempo run? So it's battling the positive and negatives. I think in our daily lives, our day to day, like how we talk to ourselves plays a role then when it really matters, right? When we're race day, mile 80 of 100, and you got to get those next 20 miles done somehow, some way.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good representation of like how we can think about like our mental training, right? Is like it's not just like, oh, like running and thinking. Like a lot of people say like, oh, I like to turn my brain off when I run. Like that's my favorite part about running is it quiets everything. But it's more like a broader mental scope of like, you know, like these skills can be applicable to anywhere. And I think that like ultra mental training can happen any place. I personally like to
Agree.
do my ultra mental training when I'm at work. You know, it's a long day at the clinic and you have to be, you know, present with a lot of people and emotionally available with a lot of people. But also maybe I woke up at 4:30 in the morning and I've already got 20 miles on the legs and I have a 10-hour workday. You know, like
Right.
mentally, how do I keep myself in a positive mindset to say like, hey, like I might not be having the most fun right now, but where's the fun in things? And sometimes
Hmm.
that's a skill that we can use in ultra running. So I guess, you know, what are some of the skills that you talk with your athletes about? Like what is going to help them?
Yeah, I guess it comes usually when we talk about, I feel like mental skills, it also comes back to somehow the why comes into a play, right? Like I feel like
Mm,
most of the time in athletes, if their why for whatever the goal is, to improve a 5K time all the way up to tackling a 200 miler, if the why is really strong and rooted in something more emotional than just, oh, I want a PR, something more number based, I feel like the mental skills tend to fall a little bit closer, right? If it's just, oh, I want to beat somebody else's Strava segment, that's not necessarily right in like an emotional attachment to yourself of you feeling better by doing that. So I think the more the why is strengthened and also bringing people back to the gratitude. I feel like sadly most of us as runners have been sidelined at some point in our career for some reason or other. Maybe work got busy, you know, you started a family or you were injured, and so the fact that you're able to do this thing that you love, whether it, you know, it could suck in the moment, it could hurt real bad, but coming back to that gratitude of like, wow, I'm in a physical space where I'm able to do this. And, you know, maybe you're on your course and you're like, wow, look at this beauty that I'm here, or look at this awesome person that I've met. You know, like you met this person we're gonna have coming on top, like, right, like trying to pull it back, big picture of like, why did I want to do this in the first place? You know, and trying to have it from an emotional standpoint, something that really means something to you. And then trying to find the gratitude, you know, like,
mm,
yes, my legs hurt, but shoot, my legs are, you know, have carried me this far. Like, thank you, legs. Right. So I usually try to kind of tie it back to the why and the gratitude. And then I feel like from there, the mental skills start to kind of trickle down, right? Those are kind of like the big pillars for me, at least.
mm.
And then it's just like the little things. You know, every training run, we have an option to kind of strengthen these skills, right? I mean, I think this weather, this winter has been kind of crazy, but most of the time, you know, those of us in the Midwest, we deal with some rough winters. And so, you know, as long as it's safe to be out there, it's like that can be great mental skills. Like, you do want to get up at 4:30 in the morning when it's dark and, you know, 10 degrees? No, you probably don't, but you're going to remember those moments when you come to race day. You know, same thing with like running in the middle of the heat and humidity in the summer. You know, yeah, it's going to suck a little bit, but you're going to learn so much about yourself that it's worth putting yourself in those situations. And each little situation can be a victory that you take with you to race day. Like, I usually have my athletes look back on some of the comments they've made. And if they don't remember, I usually flag some of like, hey, remember this workout where you surprised yourself? You didn't think you could either hit this pace, or, you know, 5 hours on the treadmill totally scared you, but you did it. You know, like, look back at those little nuggets and bring those with you, you know, like Courtney will say, in your file box, you know, for the when you hit the pain cave on race day.
Okay, pause real quick. I just want to mention some things. I love that you mentioned that the ultimate thing that we should be thinking about is why. Like, why are we doing these races? And a lot of sports psychologists will tell you that any intrinsic motivator is going to far supersede the gravitas or the pull of an extrinsic motivator. So an intrinsic motivator is like, why are you doing it? Like, what is your core? What about it fires you up just for the sake of doing it? Whether it's for you or whether it's for exploring your limits or just because you love to be outside. What is it about it that is just naturally wholesome and fulfilling for you? And that's going to, when you're in the darkest spots, like that's what's going to help carry you through for sure. So we haven't even gotten to like the extrinsic motivators yet. But the second thing that you mentioned that I really love is the visualization. And I think that is huge while we're running. It could be during a workout. It could be during an easy run. It could be during the rain, the snow, the humidity, like you said, and just visualizing like in inclement conditions where, oh, maybe I can't hold intervals because it's storming buckets outside. But maybe you can tell yourself, oh, well, if I'm running Potawatomi, I've heard people say that, hey, this race like is either going to be really rainy and stormy and wet and slick and muddy, or it's going to be really dry and sunshiny and beautiful. You never really know what you're going to get. So maybe you got to go outside and you got to train in those different conditions and tell yourself like, okay, this is potentially what it could be like at Potawatomi. My personal example, I was just at VA this past weekend. It was a beautiful day, but it came after a day of snow. So I would say about like 20% of the course was really just trying to navigate some mud. And over the course of the entire day, like some of that mud dried out, so the footing got a little bit better. But of course, like there was a lot of places I was like, okay, cool, like let's get muddy, let's figure this out. And I was thinking to myself the whole time, like, okay, I'm not holding the same speed that I would want to hold like at race pace at Potawatomi. But at the same time, most of the time when I visualize a race, I visualize the perfect conditions that I want. And we all know it's not the conditions that you want that you're going to get most of the time. So sometimes you just got to have to like, roll with the punches and just say like, hey, well, maybe I'm not hitting the paces that I want to hit, but I can justify this as amazing training because although I'm really hoping it's a 60-degree sunny day, that's probably not what we're going to get, So visualizing different parts of our race is going to be huge. And just on like the topic of visualization, we can not only visualize the conditions, but we can also visualize, hey, like, what am I going to be feeling later in the race? Do you use that with any of your athletes? Do you try to get them to visualize like, hey, pretend you're at mile 80 of a 100-mile or whatever, and try to problem solve?
For sure. And I think it becomes maybe a little bit more challenging when someone hasn't had that distance yet, especially, jumping from 50 to 100, right? It's like, how can I possibly guess what I'm going to feel like from mile 50 to 100? But again, it's those little moments, like no one's running 100 miles in their training either, right? But we still have to figure out how we're going to get there. So I think those long runs are the best chance to do that, is you're still going to feel that fatigue at hour 4 of a 5-hour run, right? Because your brain knows, oh, we've got one more hour to go. So it's like, okay, well, let's start practicing how we're going to feel in that final fifth, right? Just like you would in the 100. And I think that carries, right? Because there's something about, if you accidentally misjudge when you turn around on the trail and you get back to your car and you're like, darn, I'm 30 minutes shy.
That's
in your brain,
worst.
right? Yeah, it feels impossible to go back out for 30 minutes, even though you can, right? But it's because you're back at the finish line, if you will. So I think being able to practice like how you feel in that final chunk of whatever that is, the final chunk of a tempo run, the final big chunk of a long run. I'll tell people, save a special nutrition that you love for the end. Any little thing that can kind of help you start to practice in your long runs, things that'll help you in your race day, right? So same, like maybe it's you don't listen to music until the final stretch because that's going to bring you some energy, or like a special treat, right? Like I love a Snickers bar, so I'm going to bring a little, like Halloween size Snickers for that last, bit. Or also too, that's when you start to I want my athletes to notice what are those negative thoughts that keep coming in, right? If you constantly keep thinking, oh man, I'm already tired now, how am I going to go? Okay, well, we need to squash that voice. So I'll have them make comments too of just like, what are those reoccurring thoughts that you need to quiet? Because we need to work through those in training to make sure that they are, you've stomped them down by the time you get to that stretch in your race.
Right. That's good. Last night we were reviewing the book Running with the Buffaloes by Chris Lear at book club. And one of the comments that the coach made to the athletes was to make a movie in your mind. And that really stuck with me. I'm like, that's a really great way to explain it, because that's really it is, right? We're creating our own movie in our mind. And I do think, like you said, Reese, we forget to have a movie with rain. It's usually sunny and 50, but we never know what's going to happen. So we have to prepare for the worst. One of the things that is really hard for me, but really good mentally for me to do is I often, have long runs that are longer than my friends. So they'll run part of it with me, and nothing is worse than, you have the rest of your long run to go and they drop off and you have to keep going, and you're by your car and your friends and you want to stop, but you have to keep going. So that's a good way to kind of plan out your time too, is to kind of break free from your group and now you have to go when it's hard,
And I always preach this for kettle, especially because, at the 100K you can drop, but like do a long run and like do loops by your car, because like every time I'm coming, so when I was at VA, I ended up doing frozen gnome loops. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, a loop at Potawatomi is going to be 10 mile. If I do frozen gnomes, it's going to be more elevation and it's going to be a little bit longer. So let's see what my gear feels like to go a little. Do I have enough hydration for 10 to 12 miles on the trail or whatever with what I plan to pack, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like I stopped at my car twice. So every time I stopped at my car, I was like, man, like I'm kind of tired. but keeping in the zone and keep telling yourself like, I'm going to be
Mm-hmm.
so close to the quit button, but I'm not going to do it, like, and that's a huge mental skill that like you can practice for these tough things that we know are going to come up, because most people know that like, hey, mile 62 is probably one of the tougher
Yeah.
aid stations, at Kettle that's going to be coming up, because it's the quit button is so easy.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, now we're getting on like extrinsic motivators, like with the things that kind of give us joy, such as like, oh, that Snickers bar or whatever. Like, it's for sure a huge motivator, but like most of us are adults and can spend $1 like at the gas station for a Snickers bar. So like sometimes like you almost still have to be like somewhat invested in like an activity for that to hold a little bit of weight, because you're going to be looking forward to it at mile whatever, or what, whenever it gives you a little boost. But it's not like we have to run 60 miles before we get a Snickers bar, right? Like, what's to stop us from going quit having the Snickers? It's back to that big important, like, why am I doing this? So those
Totally.
extrinsic motivators are huge for sure. And like, I've heard people say that like, I'm doing it for the medal, or I'm doing it for the distance, or I'm doing it for this charity, or for my kids, or because I told social media that I would do it, So those are all great reasons for sure, and can help hold you accountable. But does anybody else have any other like extrinsic motivators that they've helped or they've used with their athletes?
That's a good
Yeah, I
question.
know.
Those are probably the bigger ones that I've heard of.
Yeah.
But I do know that like some people will buy themselves things like, oh, I'm gonna get these poles, but that means that I'm gonna have to use them in the race, So it's almost like you're running and then it's like, oh well, I have these poles on me and I told myself I would, like finish the race if I got them or something like that. I've heard that before. But yeah, so those extrinsic motivators, like for people out there, like it can be anything that is like an obtainable. Um, so, but at the same time too, it's not the most not important, but the most like weighted. Like it's not
Right.
gonna be the one reason, right? But it's just another tool that we can put in our mental box to help us keep going.
Right. Yeah.
So, Loretta, what was your why for the Raven?
That's a really good question. I went through a lot in the last year and a half. So part of my why was just being able to prove to myself that I can do it, that I can actually go back out and run the longer distances, because I've been struggling so much with a lot of different niggles, so that was a huge piece. And then my other why was to, show myself that I could do better, and I could go farther. If I had the right conditions. So I think those are probably my two driving whys. And then, I always like to run to also hopefully inspire other people that, can do hard things. I was by far the oldest female on the track. And, that's kind of nice to be able to go out there and show people as we age, that age is not a barrier. So that's another, big why for me.
Mm-hmm. And Coach Katie, for Bigfoot 200, what was your why?
I never, to be honest, I never even thought I would run a 100 miler. If you'd asked, if you'd like rewind 10 years ago, Katie, it'd be like 100 mile. Like, no, that's insane. That's insane. But I think every time you kind of chip away at a new distance, it leaves you curious on what does that next one look like. And so honestly, I hadn't really thought of it. And I think I might have even mentioned this in the first time we chatted about it, but I just had a dream that I was in a nap in a 200. And then when I woke up, in this panic of like, oh my God, I have to get my stuff and I've got to go. I'm like, no, you're just in your bed at home. It's a normal, Thursday morning, whatever. I could not shake that thought. And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do for my year. And I was like, well, I think this is, so it kind of started with just that weird little dream. And then I was just like, well, why not? I never thought I would do 100 miles either. And I've loved that distance. So why not throw your name in the hat for the 200? And then also too, for me, the beauty of the course and being able to like experience that all with my crew are my huge two whys for almost all my races. I want to be able to experience something that, I've never been to, and on your own 2 feet, like what better way to experience it? And then also to be able to share the crazy experience with, like your closest friends and family. It just makes it even more important. So for me, my big why a lot of times too is, oh my gosh, these people have like, these close people in your life have given up time in their world, which is so precious and so, few and far between free time to come out and help you do something. It's like, I need to get to that next station for them as much as myself, So like having, that personal relationship factor too, I think is a huge why for me.
Mm-hmm.
What's your why for kettle, Reese?
My why for kettle? I think my why for most of my races, like the number one thing that I want to do is just like prove to myself that when things get tough, I can still like have command over my thoughts and my body and still keep pushing as hard as I can. I think that's more like one of those like intrinsic factors that really pushes me and why I got like, so invested in the outdoor community and outdoor pursuits even before I started racing was that like I just want to get to those points where my body's fatigued, my mind is fatigued, and like, can I still accomplish this goal that I initially set out to do? And then as I started racing, it became, can I train for this goal that I particularly want? And how do I do that? And then I think, since we're talking about extrinsic factors, we missed a big one for some people, which is going to be position. Like I'm coaching a couple athletes right now who are like, I want to shoot for this position in this trail series, or I'm at this position, which of course it's a very, palpable goal. It's an extrinsic factor that holds a lot of weight. And that's definitely like up there for me. Like I want to be competing and I want to, if I push myself as hard as I can, like I do want to compete. So that's always up there too. So that's another huge extrinsic factor. So those are kind of like always the ones that, that kind of get me. Kettle's course record is also another huge extrinsic factor. But just like last year, if you try as hard as you can and you still come up short, like you can't be bummed about that, because my original goal is always like take as much as I can out of the day, whether that means like I'm in first the whole day and then I blow up and I have to walk things in, or I'm not having a good day and then I feel good at the end and I problem solve and I learn something about myself. Like whatever the day has to give to me, try to get the most out of it. It's kind of what happened at Tuttle Hill this past year. Definitely blew up. Definitely, didn't feel all that great afterwards. But sometimes it's those low moments and those like quote unquote like bad races that then can be your intrinsic and your extrinsic motivator for later on in the future. So you can wrap up past experiences into both of those mental motivators.
Right. I like that. And I'm glad you mentioned that extrinsic piece of placing, because that's also something that drives me. And one of my goals is to try to qualify for the USA 24-hour team. And so, I keep striving to get to that number. But I also, have athletes that are like trying to qualify for Boston. So that's a huge piece that, drives people to get those times in order to be able to qualify.
Yeah, and it drives people to push so hard, like in the mornings when it's 4 o'clock and like we're all tired and stuff like that. And I think that in and of itself is another mental skill that we can take down the trail is like, like not every training run is going to like be quote unquote like fun, but as long as it's valuable, as long as it's worthwhile in the end, it's important. Because I know like personally for me, like in Kettle last year when it's like 6, 7, 8 o'clock and the sun's starting to set and you're like, God, I'm super tired. It's like, well, this kind of feels like it's 4 o'clock in the morning and I have to like shake my legs awake to go for my run, except it's kind of the opposite. Now I have to shake my legs awake because I've been running for a long time, so you can kind of wrap those in. There's some other like mental skills that I think are super important for people that like a lot of times we all practice, but we don't necessarily know how to categorize them. And I want to say, I'm trying to think of the word that a sports psychologist will use, association and disassociation. So there is like Sally McRae is really big. Like, let's define association. That's just kind of like trying to analyze everything that's going on with your body and everything that you're feeling. And she calls it these body scans. And I really love how she details these. She says, I go through and I go from the tip of my toes and I go body part by body part and just identify and really soak in the feeling of being present with how my body feels, whether it's good or bad, right? So like for me, I'll give myself like 5 minutes and I'll just say like, okay, identify and feel that cranky ankle that's like, like not pleasant, but is also like not hindering me from running. that tight calf, that tight hamstring, like just go all the way up your body, like my tight traps, things like that. And just give yourself a second to really sit in and think like, is this a pain that I can still move through? Or is this a pain that I can like, kind of avoid a little bit? Like, is it going to like hinder my race now or later on down the road? So I guess, Katie, Coach Loretta, do you two find yourselves doing that? Do you find your athletes doing that? Like, how does that wrap into your racing?
Yeah, I definitely am doing scans, frequently throughout my race. Example, Raven. I mean, I was scanning and feeling amazing for like the first 57 miles, nothing on my body hurt, which was a huge win for me because I've been going through so much. But then I started, having some issues at 57 with my heel that I've had some work done to. And at that point, of course, mentally, I'm like, okay, maybe I'm done. And when you're 57 miles in, you're tired, you've been out there for a long time, but I didn't want to call it a day that soon. So, made some adjustments, like you said, like, okay, what can I tolerate? Made some adjustments, did some interventions to make it work, and was able to stick out there for another like 26 miles, and then at that point again, constantly during that time assessing like, okay, how can I keep this going so I can keep moving? So, thinking about the strategies to do that, which included, doing some pain medication and doing some stretching and thinking about that before it got worse, so taking minutes to pause and do some stretching, even though it was taking away from my moving forward, it was keeping me going longer, so thinking about those things, I think too, can be helpful in a race when you do need to make some adjustments.
Mm-hmm. Coach
Yeah,
Katie, do you have
going
any
kind of
examples?
tagging onto that. Yeah, like I will definitely have my athletes think through, especially scanning before you're coming into an aid station, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you're going to see your crew maybe 2 miles. Okay, how do my feet feel? How do these shoes feel? Is anything chafing? How's my stomach? Do I need to start thinking about, if it's going into the nighttime, do I have the gear I need? It's nice to have your crew have a list of those things too, right? In case your
Mm-hmm.
brain is kind of not all there. But I think it's nice for the athlete to think, oh, my feet are actually feeling pretty good. Great. Maybe I don't need to worry about, I was thinking about changing socks and shoes, but forget it. I feel good. Let's keep it going. But, my shorts are kind of riding weird. Let me switch to my tighter short, so kind of doing the scans on not only just like muscularly and kind of like moving forward how you're feeling, but also just like, how's my gear feeling? Is there anything I need to adjust that way wise? So when you come in, you can kind of already assess like, hey, I'm kind of hungry. Also, I think I need to reapply some lube here, there, so yeah, I think, and also sometimes just doing that scan can help you. It's keeping your brain focused versus I'm just like, wow, my left calf is really tight. It's like, well, that's great, but now we moved down past our calves. We're looking at our knees. How do our thighs feel? So how do my
Yeah.
shoulders feel? And then sometimes it can just help you relax other parts of your body and not focus on maybe that one little part of your body that is, giving you some nagging. And I know for me personally, as long as my soreness feels equal, like both quads feel sucky. Great. Okay, at least they're equal, like it's not
Yeah,
like just
yeah.
my right quad hurts versus, my left quad. Great. Both quads hurt. Okay, cool. We're good.
That's great. And I'm glad you mentioned that about, like, how are you feeling as far as clothing too? Because that was something that, I dealt with very early in the race. I just couldn't keep my shorts where I wanted them. And I kept having to apply more anti-chafe, because I'm like, okay, I know this is taking time and this seems ridiculous because it's so early in the race, but I knew I needed to address it now, because if I waited till later, it was going to be too late, right? And then as, the day went on, it heated up. And so, then I'm thinking about, okay, how do I feel? What's the temperature? The sun is coming out. Is it time for me to start doing some cooling measures? So then,
Mm-hmm.
of course, when you're thinking about that kind of stuff, you're forgetting all of the, I'm running laps on the track. You're forgetting how many laps you're looping, right? Because you're
Right.
thinking about, okay, when should I get this, my ice bandana so I can kind of cool myself off a little bit. And then, as the day cooled off again, when can I get rid of that? And now I'm pretty wet from that. Do I make the decision to continue with the clothes that I have and start getting cold and maybe potentially risk more chance of chafing? Or do I take a few minutes, go to the outhouse, and, at a track, I have the opportunity, my stuff is right there, to switch out. Typically I don't change anything, but I was pretty wet that day. And so I decided to make the call of, okay, I need to change into some warmer clothes because it's getting cold, cooler, and I'm wet. So
Right.
those things can preoccupy your mind to keep you
Mm-hmm.
moving too.
I like that idea of associating like internally, like almost like when you associate really heavily with one particular aspect, you kind of like remove yourself from the other parts. Like there's a classic saying in ultra running, like run the mile that you're in. And that's great. But if you're always focusing on, if your watch is beeping every single mile, it can just drive you mad because that's all you're thinking about is the total completion distance and how much you have actually done. So I think too that like as you're like turning inwards and giving yourself like the opportunity and almost permission to feel what your body's feeling, to feel like what kind of state you're in when you reach the next aid station. Giving yourself that permission to also feel the feelings of how your body feels is totally fine. Like I use that time as like permission to like give myself a pity party, or like give myself like a little pat on the back because I've been fueling and I've been hydrating and like I feel great. Give yourself that pat on the back, but don't let it like make you zoom off too quickly. I think that that's super important because again, it can kind of help us get into this flow state where now we're not thinking about the entire distance. And that in and of itself is a mental skill, is being able to get into this flow where we're not like hyper analyzing like everything, but we're just picking just certain things that can help us like pass the time.
Yeah.
Another
Yeah, I heard
thing.
another. Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, go ahead, Katie. You're fine.
No, I'd heard in another podcast, someone just kind of replaying their race star at Western States last year, and it was someone who'd been trying to get in for, I think it was like their 8th time trying to get in, and they were fighting cutoffs, and they were like, things were hurting, they're starting to worry, and they would let themselves. I thought this was just like a great technique. They'd give themselves a minute. Their pacer at this point was helping them kind of make sure it was just a minute. They're like, okay, spit out everything that's like frustrating you, feels wrong. You have a minute. That's all you get, though, is a minute. And once that minute's over, there's nothing you can change.
Oh, I like that.
Let's keep going. Right. And so, yeah, it kind of gives you just like, and I think and the athlete then after the fact was like, I loved the fact that looking back, I just had that minute, like I had to get it all out in the minute. And it was like this finite sense of time. And then I had to keep moving forward because I wanted to get to that finish. I wanted to be on that track. I wanted to experience golden hour and all those things. So it kind of gave like a limit to like how much you could pity party yourself,
Right.
So I thought that was a great takeaway from listening to his Western States story too.
I love that too, because sometimes I think we start persevering on that and then we can't get past it. And then we get into this dark mental cave that's hard to get back out because you're just so focused on the negative and forget about the positive things that are happening. The other thing I was going to share is, well, in a few weeks, we're going to have Adam Pop, and he is an amazing athlete. And I shared some miles with him on the track. And it was interesting because he had been following me a lot of the day because I was the pace that he wanted to be. So, he was like, right behind me. But then we started talking a little bit. And next thing you know, we're just like cranking out the laps, and just talking, about life in general. And you forgot all about how many laps that we had done or what distance we were at. And then, at one point I did have to look at my watch. I'm like, oh my gosh, we've like really dropped the pace, like, because, now we're talking, we're forgetting about it. We're forgetting about how we feel. And he's like, yeah, isn't that amazing how that happens? And our heart rates have dropped and we're just like relaxed and just running, And so sometimes that can help too, finding somebody on the trail to just have a conversation with. I had another guy that was giving me a hard time about my ice bandana and saying he was going to steal it from me. So just like those things can just kind of make you forget about what you're doing and just having fun.
Yeah, and that's a good like introduction to the flip side of the coin, to dissociation. So we've been talking about association, like really getting into your body and feeling the feels, giving yourself permission to have your pity party or have your pat on the back, permission to feel everything. And then there's the dissociation technique, which is equally as important. And I think like the real key to like figuring out like ultra running is being able to flip back and forth between the two, because just as much as I love to focus on everything that's either hurting or not hurting or how hydrated I am or what my fingers feel like and all that stuff, like at the end of the day too, like sometimes we do have to tune out. We do have to say like, think about everything other than running or how much mileage you have left. Like my classic example is like, think about something that has nothing to do with who you are, where you are, or what you're doing. Such as like, think about like how many baseballs there are in New York City, or like think about like your example, Loretta, like just talking about other things, kids, family experiences, what's coming up in the future that doesn't happen to do with running, friends that you've made. Sometimes like mine at Galena last year there was a gal who was wearing like a a singlet that said like death by ice cream with a bunch of like ice cream cones and like skulls and stuff like that. So every time I would pass her, I'd go, ice cream, ice cream, ice cream. So it was dissociative for me because I'm breathing hard, like it's hot outside, like I'm not feeling the best. I already associated, I felt the feels. And then I would tell myself, okay, just forget all about that and just think about when's the next time I'm going to see Miss Ice Cream so I could chant with her, you know? So you can use like all of those techniques. And I think that like, you know, as far as training goes, like I always tell my athletes, like if they're running intervals and stuff like that, like in order to train association and dissociation, like I want people to be lapping their watches manually because I think it's just an extra little thing that you have to do that makes you say like, where am I in this interval? How much longer do I have? How does this feel? When am I going to hit the button? You know? And then too, like dissociation, like, you know, just go out for your like 2 hour long run, turn your watch face on just the time. Don't even feel about it. Look at the butterflies, take some pictures, things like that. And sometimes too, like I'll find myself in workouts, like dissociating when I should be associating. And it's like all of a sudden like, oh, I have this 3 minute interval that I wanted to do. And now it's 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Like, oh, what the hell? You know, zone back in. And then you tell yourself, okay, next interval, I'm going to be better at this, you know?
So
okay, I've definitely been there.
For sure. So
sorry, I was catching my breath.
yeah, you mentioned earlier, like, you know, thinking about saying about the mile you're in, and, you know, that's another big piece is like the mental piece is breaking down the race, right? So I often, I don't know why, and I hate it when my brain goes here, but I start like looking at the big goals, like, right? So I hit the marathon. Yay. Next is 50K. Okay, 50K is not too far away. Well, next is 50 miles. When you start breaking it down like that, it just tears you apart because it's, especially on the track, it's one loop at a time, you know, like 400 meters at a time. And it's a lot of laps before you're going to get to that next big milestone. So I had to really keep pulling myself out of that because I get to that thinking, oh, next is 50, then it's the 100K, you know? And so, you know, had to really resort to, though, like I had to stay in that mile, like, okay, just get to the next mile, Loretta, just focus and get to the next mile. Don't worry about the 50K or the 100, you know, 50 mile or 100K. What do you guys do with that? How do you, you know, think about it? It's a whole different beast, I think, on the track than it is on a trail or on a bigger looped course. So, you know, I'm
Yeah, I
seeing
was just gonna say
through
the
every
track's got to
400
be
meters.
like such a mental, like it's such a different mental game because
Yes,
you know you are hyper aware of where you are. Whereas I feel like on
every
trail,
second.
you know, I mean, granted, if you know the kettle course like the back of your hand, like there's certain moments you're like, I kind of know I'm at mile, whatever, but like you can at least zone a little bit more into the scenery. But yeah, on the track, it's got to be just a
Yeah,
wicked mind game of
it
not
it
being hyper
is.
focused on where you
Yes.
are.
And knowing you can stop at any second to get
Yeah.
aid when you really might not need to. Like if you were out on the trail, you probably go another 5 miles. But since it's right there, you're going right by.
Yeah.
I don't even know how you do that, Loretta, honestly, because I think one of my tricks, one of my mental things that I do when I'm on the trails is like I'll think about like sections, right? It's like, okay, just get through this section. And then once I hit that like road crossing or whatever, it's like, ah, oh, I made it. Mental like accomplishment, little pat on the back, you know?
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well now let's get to this other section, you know? Instead
Yep.
of thinking like, how much time do I have? Because when I think, let's just take like Kettle, for example, because I know some of the aid stations like you start the race, it's like, okay, I'm not even gonna look at my watch until I get to McMiller. And then you get to McMiller and you're like, okay, am I on pace or am I not on pace? You know, and at that point, all I'm thinking is McMiller. I'm not thinking about what mile marker it is. You know, I just know that
Right.
the first time I come through McMiller, I want to come through by 12 o'clock or whatever it is, you know? So at that point, I'm still not even really thinking about miles. It's just like, okay, that section, boom, accomplished. Or that section, ooh, I kind of need to like make up 10 miles somewhere. Maybe I just needed to give it like a little bit more gas for the next like 2 or 3 hours, you know, instead of trying to make up that 10-minute difference in the next 20 minutes and then blowing up, you know?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, we're going around the track. Like it's kind of like our kettle example where it's like that dropout out that the quit button is so close. It's at any point you can just stop and then walk
Yeah.
less than 100 meters back to your car and
You
you're
know,
gone.
it's
You know?
about 2.5 minutes away
Yeah.
every lap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it probably
So
reminds me of kind of like the mentality you need to have almost for like a backyard ultra style, right? Where, you know, it's just like the hour on the hour, you know, and yeah, it's like you're coming back to your spot. You could easily just be like, you know, I'm good. I'm
Right,
yeah.
exactly. Exactly. It's funny though, because my husband is my crew chief and he'll try to, stop me to give me things and I'll be like, no, I'm good, and I'll keep going. And sometimes though, it's a loop is only 2.5 minutes, but you go a few loops too long, it's too late. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like it's going to be because I'll be like, oh, I'll just go around a couple more times, but it still is adding time and like, oh, I
Hmm.
really should have taken that nutrition or hydration that I declined because I thought, I'm feeling good. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it gets a little deceptive, I guess, with that.
how about, okay, so like with race strategy, like with a race like that, with a race like tunnel, like a lot of people find a good amount of help just keeping their bodies in the game if they do a run walk strategy. But like for everybody that does a run walk strategy, like Deanna, she did that for Tunnel Hill, right? So she was running for like 10 minutes and then she would take like a 5 minute, or it was 15 minutes, and she would take like a 5 minute walk break. And even she would say that, like, hey, like, yeah, I was walking and I was like catching my breath and I was able to like maneuver my gear and stuff like that. Like that's all physical. But at the same time, too, like when you're walking, you just get this mental de-stressor of like, boom, like I just clicked off that. It's almost like another section. Like, okay, that 15
Hmm.
minutes, I ran that entire time. I did great. Pat on the back, refuel, get ready for the next one. Did you find yourself doing that with the track, or did you have an idea of like, oh, I just want to be hitting like 2.5 minutes like every lap?
Yeah, I just really focused on a time of about what I wanted to, like I knew going out, I didn't want to be any faster than 2:20, 2:30, 2:45 would be okay. But I would, I was trying to keep it within that range. So that was probably my big focus is just that keeps me engaged is knowing like, okay, every time you go by, you see a big screen of all of your lap time. And so
Mm-hmm.
you see that every time lap time, your position, all of that. And so I just kind of narrow in on that, making sure, because your watch isn't as accurate or my watch isn't as accurate on the track, so just keeping a track of that is kind of what I focus on. I didn't go in with a real specific run walk. Some people do, and it's very, rigid and that's the way they do all day. Other people kind of go, run and then walk when they need to. So I just knew that I was going to go in and I'll allow myself grace to walk when I needed to, but and also not let it go for too long. I mean, I was trying not to, walk for a very, when I walked, it was with a purpose of eating soup. It was like, okay, I'm going to take this lap. I get to eat my soup and then I will go again.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of trail runners find that too. Like I've noticed in some like really hilly, like when I was doing Wasatch a couple years ago, is it's almost like, okay, like you're hiking up a mountain and then you're descending a mountain and you're thinking to yourself like, okay, like this descent hurts, and then you have a little bit of flat like in some of the valleys, right? And you come off of the descent and you're like, God, I really need a break. And there's like when you're running like a mountain, sometimes like if you're walking downhill, that's kind of when you know you're in a really tough spot because that's kind of where like you can let your heart rate come down and you're just kind of like rolling along. So I noticed some spots where I would come to like a flat and I would think to myself like, oh my God, I can't wait to get to the next ascent to give myself permission to hike. And then, if my stomach's a little like messed up, then it's like, okay, that's my permission to then, since I'm hiking, like I'm eating and I'm drinking and stuff like that. So I feel like a lot of trail runners like find like they can chunk a race like that too, like especially when they're in a rough spot, which is like, okay, like let's, instead of thinking about the next 10 miles, let's just think about the next however long it is until I get to a big enough hill that I need to hike. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like
Yeah.
hill, 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 come.
Yeah, because usually the hills guide you, right? So
Mm-hmm.
then that variable gets taken away. And of course, like Hennepin or Tunnel Hill or a track. But
Mm-hmm.
the benefit I found that I really noticed, I don't know why I was so in tune with this at this race, but I really could tell like if I started feeling a little bit fatigued because I do have aid every quarter mile. If I started to feel a hint of fatigue, if I just got grab some calories or water or whatever I needed, I could change around like so quickly. And I thought that was, because if I did the opposite and like, okay, I'm feeling fatigued because I tend to like to push through, like not listening to my body. You know what I mean? Like, okay, I'm feeling a little tired. Oh, I can make 2 more laps. But if I didn't and I made that adjustment right then, it was just a big game changer for me of how I felt. So I think it's, I mean, really a good tool for me to have to put into a different type of race as well. Like stop, trying to say, oh, be so rigid on, oh, I said I was going to take in fuel every 30 minutes. Wait a second, I'm 10 minutes early and I'm starting to feel that little bit of fatigue. I need to maybe adjust my plan a little bit, instead of just willing myself past it. I don't know if
Mhm.
you guys feel that way, but sometimes you're like, okay, I said I wasn't going to do it for this. Now I'm going to make it.
For sure. I think that brings up a good conversation about just the power of our dress to like give us a second wind. Like you hear a lot of people say like, "Oh, I changed my socks and it was a game changer. I felt amazing." So like sometimes like these physical things can lead to like better mentalities or better mindsets.
Yes.
So I know like I personally don't prefer to like change it all because I just don't want to stop and do that. But my girlfriend Deanna, like she wants to be changing shoes and socks, and it makes her feel great. And I know so many other people like that. And it's funny because during my day to day life, I know that. Like when I'm at work, like what I like to do is I like to work in my morning socks, right? Like they're all like used and beat up by the time I go for my run, and then I use those socks for my run. I come back and then I put on a new pair of socks, and I feel like a new man. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess like, are there any other examples? Because that just came off the top of my head. I mean, are there any other examples of things that people will tell themselves, kind of like that Snickers bar conversation we had before? Like, oh, I can't wait to get to this Snickers bar. Are there certain athletes that you have where it's like they tell you like, oh, I'm gonna have this change of clothes, or I'm gonna have this thing that I'm gonna put on that's gonna help give me a second win?
I do
Yes, I
have
mean, even
athletes
just, oh,
change.
sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, as I say, I do have athletes that choose that they're wanting to change. I'm more like you. Like I typically never change unless there's a reason. But I did change at the Raven because, like I said, I was pretty wet and I was a new woman when I came out of that outhouse.
Coach Katie, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, for me personally, like I always have baby wipes and those little toothbrushes. And just being able to clean sweat off my face, I feel like it is a game changer. And then the toothbrush is the same. Like you just get that like buildup of like sports nutrition, like stuff on your teeth,
Yes.
and
Yes.
just being able to have like a quick like little brush is a game changer. So I always tell people to make sure you have some of that stuff in your drop bags if you're like me, where it's just like you feel slightly like more of a human when you're not, covered in nasty sweat and your teeth are coated in sugar.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's just a little bit of a pick me up, isn't it? Just to have
Yeah.
a little bit of change of sensory.
Yeah, I guess so. That's what I have for the topic about like mental training and skills. And I think, like I kind of want to wrap up the conversation and just say like everything that we just mentioned, you can wrap back into your daily life too. Like kind of like I mentioned with the socks and stuff like that. Like, maybe that's a lesson for me to say that like, hey, like if I'm gonna pack a drop bag at like, for kettle, like, the second time you go through Highway 12, I don't know what particular mileage that is, but that's where I put my headlamp. So maybe I'll just have a set of socks there just in case I'm like really struggling and that would help me out.
Right.
Or, like in my day to day life, just like we mentioned at the top of the show, like, when I'm in these situations that have nothing to do with running, maybe I can call back and say, like, okay, what are these what are these dissociation skills that I can call back to? I think one that comes to my mind that I do a really bad time with is like I love to run, and if I don't get my run in, then I'm kind of cranky. I'm super
Reese
cranky.
cranky? I've never seen this.
Yeah, I'm definitely not fun to be around. It's happened a couple times, and I try to like not let it get the best of me, but of course it does sometimes. And when you're in the thick of it, right? Like as runners, and we're like, oh, we want to get like this mileage, and all of a sudden, like it just doesn't happen because of family or commitments or environmental circumstances or something happens, or you're a mother or father and can't, and your kid this, that, whatever. Like, okay, maybe that's the time. Even though it's the hardest to do, maybe that's the time where I got to tell myself, okay, step back, you kind of dissociate and say like, hey, the day's not going how I thought I was gonna go, but like now what do I like? How do I adapt to that? So that's
Right.
another personal example from my life. And if Deanna's listening, she's gonna laugh because she knows exactly what I'm talking about. But
I was just
yeah,
thinking, can we have Deanna on the podcast? We want to
yeah.
we want to know the whys behind Reese.
Yeah, we get a lot of my perspective about our running relationship on here. Maybe we should get her on.
Oh, that's great. And I had an example yesterday, so I had to do our taxes. I mean, I'm no tax expert, and it is mentally stressful for me. And I want to stop and put it down? Yes, but I made myself like power through, and really get it done. And that's another thing, like if I were on the trail and I was really tired, I would still have to keep going, right? So, you have to get through some things on a day-to-day basis. When I used to work in education and, I was a supervisor, there were really hard days and there were really hard things that you had to get through, meetings and trainings and, those kind of running helped me get through them. And I think those things helped me get through running, right? It all kind of ebbs and flows. You learn a lot of skills of adaptability in all aspects of your life, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There's a favorite quote of mine from a band called The Faces. A lot of people know Rod Stewart. There's this song called "Had Me a Real Good Time," and the song is definitely not about what I'm gonna share, but it's what it means to me. And part of the lyric is in the song is, "So while I was here, I had me a real good time." And to me, what that means is like, well, I put myself here, or I'm gonna be here, or I have to be here. So where can I find the fun in this like bad circumstance or this circumstance I didn't feel like I would find? And that's a mental skill that you can do at any point. Like it's about 40 degrees out right now, and I love my job and I love working, but I love being outside a lot more than I like to be at the clinic, right? So like, I have to go in while I'm there. How do I have me a real good time? And that can be taken to the trail, just like everything else we've been mentioning.
Yeah, I love that.
That is good. Katie, do you have anything else that you want to add about mental strength that we might have missed?
So when I was kind of like putting some stuff together, I didn't know about this little quiz, but one of the podcasts I was listening to that just again happened to bring up the mental skills side of things. Have you heard of the SISU? I might be pronouncing it wrong. Or SISU quiz. It's SISU.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a quiz and I took it for fun, just because I was like, oh, I found it. So if you look it up, you can take it for free, and it pretty much breaks things down into like 8 different components of mental skills or toughness, they call it.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, it gives you like a score based on a couple different like their algorithm, right? So some of the examples are like, it'll ask you questions about determination, confidence, positive self-talk, and then it essentially like kind of gives you a score on each of those 8 different dimensions of like low, moderate, and high. And they really, of course, like they say, like, take this honest, don't take it how you want to be. And then it kind of pops out, right, those different scales. And then the woman that put this quiz together is like, then once you know the areas that maybe you can strengthen, right, you can identify which ones those are, learn how to strengthen them, and then in that like do something that actually kind of helps, like the 3-step. So I thought that was just kind of a fun.
Oh, that's really cool. Have you had any of your athletes do that? Because I'm
No,
thinking,
I
that
literally,
could be fun.
it was like, in the universe, or like, maybe my podcasts are listening to me, like I knew we had this today, and no joke, like the podcast that I listened to yesterday on my run mentioned this quiz.
And you're like,
so I was like, the phone is definitely always listening and watching us, but it was just so timely. So yeah, so I just took it myself last night, and I was just like, oh, this is super interesting. So yeah, as long as you take it realistically, honestly, I think it can kind of pop out some interesting stuff just that maybe you hadn't thought of. And then, because part of it was like, if you don't know where you have a weakness, you can't strengthen it, mm-hmm. right? So just kind of like, if you don't know that you suck on balancing on one foot, you can't, necessarily know that you need to fix that. Same thing with like the mental skill stuff. It was kind of cool to be like, oh, okay, maybe your self-confidence is amazing, but your self-talk isn't as great as it could be. So it's like, okay, well, now that I know that from these questions, how can I fix that? Like we were talking in our day-to-day life, or when you're out on a run. Yeah, so it was, I'll send you guys a link, but
that's a good tip.
It was kind of fun. Yeah.
And
it was quick. It was like a 5-minute quiz. It was
nice.
It was fun. Yeah.
Oh God, that's another like mental skill that we didn't even touch on, is just positive, like self-talk,
yeah,
like a lot of it. Well, I guess we kind of alluded to it like at the beginning with the, talking heads on the shoulder. But like if we can like help give ourselves words of affirmation or whatever it is, maybe you get to the night before a race and you're having jitters because you haven't been sleeping well. Maybe you tell yourself like, hey, although circumstances aren't good, I did as well as I could have in training, and now I'm going to turn this around and have a great day tomorrow, regardless of the outcome. Or telling yourself that like, hey, I am enough. I do deserve to be here. Like I have prepared for this. Maybe it's a new distance you've never ran for and you're scared of that, but you tell yourself like, I have experience. I can problem solve. Like I'm good at these things. You don't let that like negative monkey like keep like weighing your back.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of similar to almost like having like a mantra, something simple, right? Like I think I've been like podcast time right now. It was like Courtney talking about just being a robot, or like, I'm fine, everything's fine. Mine is, my coach simply put in one of my kettle notes from a few years ago, like, you're able and capable. That was like the top. And then it was like all the details. And it's so simple. It's like, yes, we're all able and we're all capable. So it's just, sometimes it has to be just something so similar, right? Like Courtney's, I'm fine, everything's fine. Like, it's nothing earth shattering, but it's something little that you say that you're like, yeah, everything is fine. Or yeah, I am able and capable. So I'll usually try to have people think of something small too that they can repeat to themselves that does just either one, get out of that negative mindset, because now you're thinking about your mantra, or maybe the mantra is something like, yeah, I'm strong AF, I can do this, it could be either or.
Yeah, that's good.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Coach Katie. It was a pleasure
Thank
having you
you.
on. I love this conversation. I love this topic. I love that we can train for it at any point in our lives. And I love that everybody here gave so many good examples of when they've had to use mental skills in their life. So to go back to the beginning of the episode, like, why do we need to train this? Well, because, we are legs and we are lungs, and they need to be optimized for what we're trying to do. But at the same time too, like, if you're not well up here, like, how are you going to make everything else work? So these mental skills are going to be great at keeping people's heads level and getting down the trail, given really good circumstances, or maybe you're kind of having a hard one out there. So, because that's what we live for, right? Like, we want to do these ultras to experience not only the good and the finish line and the feelings that we've done it, but also to persevere through the things that we want to test ourselves through. So thank you so much for joining us. Any parting words from anybody before we log off?
I think we're good.
Yeah.
Beautiful. We'll take
It was
care,
nice
everybody.
seeing you,
We'll see you
Katie.
next week.
Bye.
And thank you,
Bye.
God.